We are the Childhood Collective, and we have helped thousands of overwhelmed parents find joy and confidence in raising their child with ADHD. I'm Katie, a speech language pathologist.
And I'm Lori.
And I'm Mallory, and we're both child psychologists. We combine the science of ADHD with the compassion of moms and bring you practical tools you can start using today.
So hit subscribe and let's help your family shine with ADHD.
Today I'm here with Lori and Mallory as we dive into one of your most common questions. How do I talk with my child about their ADHD diagnosis?
Yes, and we constantly hear from parents who truly want to say the right thing, and we totally get it. It feels like a lot of pressure.
Yeah, and when I'm talking with families, they often express they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. I think we've all been there. It almost seems easier not to say anything at all because you don't want to mess it up.
So true. But in general, we do recommend that parents talk with their children about the diagnosis. And today we want to explain why we make this recommendation and give you some tools.
Absolutely. And I think that one thing that's important for parents to understand is that we're speaking about kids with ADHD in general. So, with that being said, each family situation, each individual child is unique. So, as parents, it's really up to you to use your discretion when it comes to understanding your child's developmental level, choosing the language that matches your child's developmental level and their ability to understand these concepts.
Okay, so let's start with a really common question is why is it important to talk with our kids about their diagnosis? The thing is, and this is true for many of the kids and families that I see in my private practice, many kids are really aware that something is going on. So maybe they're even saying to you, why am I always bad? So that's one where like I hear this so often from kids and parents, like I feel like I'm a bad kid, or I really want to do the right thing, but my body isn't letting me when these things happen at school. Or they're saying I'm stupid, or why can't I be as good as other kids? So many kids are starting to recognize they're having challenges, right? And they're even starting to create these negative labels for themselves, like I'm stupid, I'm bad, I can't do anything right. So I think it's really important to be able to provide them with a label that doesn't have a bad meaning to it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why it isn't a bad thing to have ADHD, and it can be a great thing. And I think, again, when we talk about the diagnosis with our kids, depending on their level, we can talk about other people who are actually really successful and famous that have really been able to have ADHD and make it their superpower. So we have examples of Simone Biles with gymnastics, most people would say the top athlete. Michael Phelps, the top athlete swimmer. Both of these people having ADHD and have talked about that. And that's something that you can talk with your kids about. Again, if they're not an athlete, you can think of other examples. But also, it gives our kids a way to understand their brain, understand how it works, and then start the process very early with them of how to advocate for their needs and advocate for how they learn best, what they need. I work with kids who are in middle school whose parents have been talking about this for many years. And it's amazing to me for parents to come back and say, they were asking their teacher when they started a new grade, like, can I sit in the front of the room because I have a hard time and get distracted in the back and it's easier for me. And it like makes my heart so happy to know that they've been able to learn that and understand their brain and understand their strengths and their challenges and be able to advocate for themselves.
I love that. And I know with my own daughter, I'm always so impressed at her ability to do that exact thing. I remember her asking the teacher, And the teacher even emailed me about this. She asked the teacher, "Can I go sit over there because this kid is distracting me?" Back in probably kindergarten, first grade, when she already knew, hey, this is bothering me. And I was so impressed by that because I would never have been that kid. Like, I was never going to raise my hand and tell a teacher, this isn't working for me. But I remember just being blown away that she could do that. And when we give our kids that language and help them understand, hey, it's okay, this is something that a lot of people struggle with, or it's okay to ask for what you need, that's huge. And I think that makes such a big difference. The other thing I wanted to mention is when you talked about famous people with ADHD, and another thing that can be so helpful in families is talking about other people in the family who might have a similar diagnosis, like an
Yes.
uncle or maybe an older sibling or a cousin. And I think that can be really powerful for our kids to recognize like they're not alone. And those kind of famous figures can be great because that everyone kind of knows who they are and definitely can aspire to be like that. But it's also really helpful on a micro level to know that there's people in your family who either have that diagnosis or even just maybe struggle with some of the same things. And my kids love it when we talk about, like, my husband really struggled in school, and we'll talk about that. He's really open about it and saying, oh, when I was a kid, reading was so hard for me. And it's amazing for them to just see their little brain working to even think of dad as a 6-year-old and thinking like, oh my gosh, my dad had a hard time with this. But it's really normalizing when they struggle with something. Like, we've all been there, we've all struggled. I think that's really, we can't overestimate how powerful that can be for our kids.
Absolutely. And I think we get this comment a lot on Instagram, kind of, my child has ADHD and I have it too.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes things really hard. And it does. If you yourself have ADHD and you're parenting a child or multiple children with ADHD, that's really hard. But there's also a really beautiful piece of it that you can really relate to your child in a way that is truly a gift for them. You get it. And so for them to know that and hear your own personal struggles and how you overcame them, hopefully, or how you're still working on them, is so helpful for your kids to hear that. And it really is a gift in that way.
I completely agree. So let's talk about some of those common objections, right? We talk about this all the time on social media, to our email list. We let everyone know, hey, it's really important to talk to your child about their diagnosis. And we get a few very specific, consistent objections. So we just want to talk about that because that's okay. I think it's great that we're all thinking about it. So the first thing that parents often worry about is that giving their child a label is going to negatively impact their self-esteem. And I get that. I can understand where you might be worried, like, oh my gosh, if I tell them that they have ADHD and then they just identify that as a negative thing, that makes sense. But what Lori mentioned before is that our kids can give themselves some really harsh labels. And the truth is, you can't protect your child from everyone around them that could also give them a negative label. So girls with ADHD often get called spacey, or she's just so ditzy. And boys can get negative labels as well. And it's really important that we give them accurate terminology, because when they start to internalize those negative labels, that is when it really damages their self-esteem. And these kids can grow up thinking that they're not that smart, or they're not that good at something, or they're not a hard worker, they're lazy. And again, these are labels that can get put on them by a teacher, another peer, themselves. But what we want to do is give them accurate language so that they don't have to have diminished self-esteem. They can understand what's actually happening.
Yep.
Another common objection that we hear is that parents are worried that their child is going to use the ADHD label as a crutch or as an excuse. Well, I have ADHD, so I can't do that. I can't clean my room. I can't be nice. I can't come to breakfast. I have ADHD. And again, we want to validate that. That is a valid fear that your child is not going to understand it fully, and that they're going to think like, okay, it's fine. I can just use my ADHD as an excuse. But it's very important for us to reframe this thought process. And so we want to use an example of kids who need other supports. Let's think of a kid who cannot see well without glasses, or a kid who is diabetic and needs insulin, or a child who needs a wheelchair in order to access a ramp and to go up the stairs. So we would never say, oh, you know what? They're just going to use their glasses as an excuse. They're going to say, oh, you know what? I can't see because I don't have my glasses. Like, too bad. We would laugh at that example because, of course, they can't see without their glasses. And we want them to have access to glasses or insulin or the wheelchair. And this is really important because kids with ADHD, their brains do work differently. It's not an excuse. Their brain genuinely is working in a different way, and they have differences in executive functioning. And the analogy can be continued to say our kids need accommodations a lot of times. This doesn't mean that we don't have high expectations of our kids, but it means that we can support them. We can build the skills that are missing, and we can help think through how we can be supportive. This is not an excuse, but we're realizing what they need and we're meeting that need the same way that we would meet a child who can't see or needs support in that way.
Yes. And I think because ADHD is really an invisible disability, it's very hard for even family members sometimes. Like maybe one parent understands, yes, this is hard for them, but the other parent doesn't. And I think sometimes that concern of, are they going to use this as a crutch, really comes from a mindset of, this isn't actually a disability, right? Like they are not actually struggling. Their brain is not working differently. And I think sometimes it's where parents have to go back and really understand medically what ADHD is and get that education themselves to understand that, yeah, it's not a crutch. This actually is legitimately hard for them, and they do need accommodations and interventions to really be successful.
Absolutely. So it's not an excuse, it's an explanation. It's an explanation for why they might do things differently or why they might need supports that other kids don't need. And when you're talking to your child about their ADHD, you're talking about how, some things come really easy for you. And these are those things, and these are the things that you do really well. But because of how your brain works, these things might be harder for you, or you might need these supports that other kids don't need, just like your brother needs glasses to see from the back of the room. It's just how your brain works, and it's not bad and it's not wrong. And we're trying to work with, the brain that you have that we love and is brilliant, right? So if you're having these concerns as a parent and you're feeling like, oh, my child is just using this as an excuse, they're trying to get out of doing something, use that feeling and that emotion as a parent to guide some of your own problem solving, and use that as kind of a guide of like, okay, I'm having this feeling right now that my child is using ADHD as an excuse not to do this. Let me do some problem solving around that. I feel like my child is capable of this task and of this skill. Is it a developmentally appropriate expectation based on how my child is growing and developing? And again, their brain is growing and developing differently because of the ADHD. And if I think it's a reasonable expectation, how can I break it down and teach it to my child? And how do I support them so they do that? So kind of use that feeling, that like gut reaction of like, oh, they're just using it as an excuse or as a crutch to kind of guide teaching your child and taking those next steps. And as Katie already alluded to, we still have goals and we still have expectations for our kids. We're not just saying like, oh, my child has ADHD, they're never going to do these things. Just like with all kids, kids with ADHD can learn, they can grow, they can make progress. And that's what we're expecting them to do. But we have to have those reasonable expectations, meet them where they are, to then move forward and learn and grow.
I think something that you're getting at too in your example is to say that if you suspect that your child is using it as a crutch, let's use an example like homework. So I know that my child can do this addition, these math problems. My child is very capable of doing it, but I see my child really struggling today with homework. And so if we're going to get curious about that and we're going to think, okay, I know that the math itself is not hard for them. They are capable. So why is it taking 40? Why is his foot on the counter? Why is he not wearing a shirt? What is happening in the meantime that they aren't able to get their math homework done? And when we get curious about that, it opens our mind to see, okay, I think what's actually happening here is the skill that's breaking down is the executive functioning of getting started on the task. And that's really challenging for him, or keep going once I've gotten started, and to really have that persistence to finish the activity. And so
Mhm.
when those moments when you're like, this is manipulation, really, we encourage you to dig a little bit deeper to figure out where that breakdown is happening, because it might
Mhm.
not be the skill that you think you're measuring, like the math paper. It might be that there's other skills related to ADHD that aren't there yet. And again, we wouldn't say, all right, no math homework for you. We would say, okay, how can we support you in getting this done? Do you need a timer? Do you need a visual schedule to help you understand how many we're going to do before we take a break? Do you need food and water before you're going to be ready to settle in here? Do you need a bouncy seat to help you to regulate your body? There's so many options. And again, you wouldn't do all of those, but you're going to start asking those questions and getting curious to figure out what's happening here. And that's, I think, the differentiation between, oh, they know how to do this, so they're manipulating me, and thinking like maybe there's a piece of it that they actually have not mastered.
And I think
Yeah.
that's so important. And I'm glad that you clarified and kind of provided that example, because so often with ADHD, the struggle is not surface level. It's
Yes.
a lot deeper. And it would be easier to just say, "Oh, they're not doing the math because they don't know how to add." But oftentimes for kids with ADHD, the struggle is deeper. It's often executive functioning related, and it does take some problem solving and digging to kind of really get at where is the struggle, what's getting in the way. One thing I hear from my friends is that their kids often think boring tasks like chores or homework are going to take forever. And in the same breath, their kids can play 2 hours of Minecraft and then complain that they just got started.
Okay, I think that friend you're referring to might actually be me.
I'm not naming names. One tool we all love and have in our own homes is Time Timer.
At this point, I think we all have multiple time timers. For kids with ADHD, time can be a very abstract concept, and time timer helps by making time more concrete. It helps kids visually see the passage of time.
And it can prevent those inevitable meltdowns when 2 hours of Minecraft just wasn't justification enough to ask your child to complete 5 minutes of chores.
From homework to chores to screen time to daily hygiene to our own work, we love Time Timer because it is so versatile and their designs are cute too. A staple in our homes.
If you have a child with ADHD, we know you need a time timer, and we have a discount code for you to use. So head to timetimer.com and use the code TCC to get the discount. You can also find the link and code in the show notes. Well, let's move on to how do I actually have a conversation with my child about their ADHD diagnosis? And we know many of you would love for us to just provide you with a script. That would make it so much easier, right? But we don't have a script for you, but we do want to give you some suggestions on how to navigate this. The first is I want to take some pressure off of you. That this isn't just one conversation, because I think a lot of parents like feel like there's so much riding on this like one conversation, right? And this is going to be a series of conversations with your kids. And the first one, they might not even care. They might be like, okay, great, and move on. And that's it. And then, a year later, it might be a different conversation as their brain grows and develops and they think about things differently. You're going to talk about it differently. So I think there's so much pressure on parents that they're feeling of, I need to have the perfect conversation or this needs to go a certain way. It's not that one conversation. You're going to be talking about this, hopefully over and over again and in different situations to help them really understand it. The other thing to really consider is your child's age, and not just their age, but their developmental level, to know how to talk about it. So if I'm having a conversation with a 6-year-old about their diagnosis, I'm going to be talking in very, very simple language to help them understand their brain and how things work. And it's going to be a super short conversation. Whereas my conversation with a 12-year-old or 14-year-old is going to be a little bit higher level, to help them understand that. So really think about if you're having that conversation for the first time with a young child, it's going to be a short conversation. It's not going to be super in depth, and you have to really make it relatable and understandable for them. And we really want to emphasize focusing on your child's strengths. And I will tell you, I have these conversations with kids all the time at different levels after their diagnoses. And sometimes I'm doing it with a 6-year-old, sometimes I'm doing it with an 18-year-old. And in every conversation, I will say that I always start with the child's strengths. And usually I have done a full evaluation on them, and I have many things to point out in their strengths. And I'm going to talk about the strengths that their parents told me about, and the strengths that their teachers told me about, and the strengths that I actually saw in some of the testing that I did. And I can tell you, they just light up. They light up during this time to hear some of those things. And it's not that we're not going to talk about the things that are hard, but we really want to emphasize that this isn't impacting them negatively in every area of their life. It just isn't. So really starting with strengths is such an important part of that conversation.
Absolutely. And I think about myself getting feedback. And if someone just starts with, okay, here's what's not working, that's going to feel
Yes.
really difficult, But when you have that rapport, and of course, we all know our kids. And so we can pick out hopefully a lot of strengths that they have. And I love that you always are the first one to jump up and help when somebody gets hurt. And it's so
Hmm.
amazing to me when I see you sit down and read to your little brother, even though I know you think that's a baby book. Be really specific in that praise and sincere in it too, to make sure that they really understand and connect to that, because I think that's huge. And then the next piece of this is going to be introducing the idea of a growth mindset. And if you're not familiar with growth mindset, it's a whole body of research, but the idea and the key word in growth mindset is yet. So when we say, oh, I don't know how to do this, we add yet at the end. I don't know how to ride my bike yet. I'm not stuck at the level of not riding my bike forever. I just haven't figured it out yet. And it's the idea that we're all growing and we all have things that we're working on. And I will say in my family, the conversations around ADHD have been really authentic. And it's part of the reason is that we've always talked about things that we're all good at and things that we're all working on. I wouldn't say things you're good at and things you're bad at. I would say things you're good at and things that you're working on. And when I think about that with my own kids, I share with them, I'm really working on keeping my patience. I'm really working on becoming a runner, which is really hard for me. And my kids know I don't like to run, but I'm trying. I go to Orange Theory multiple times a week and I run. And they ask me, Mom, how was your run? And I'm like, it was so hard. I had to run up a hill, but they're cheering me on and they're excited. They're proud of me. And so it's really normal. Like I said, my husband talks about school being a challenge for him. And so when my kids struggle on a test or they're having trouble with flashcards, we've normalized this like, oh man, you're working so hard at this, buddy. And this is really hard for dad. I mean, our kids do poetry at school and we're always so impressed. We're practicing this poem with them for like 2 or 3 weeks. And then at the end, they know it and we still don't know it. We're like, how did you do it? And we talk about that. We're like, gosh, your memory is so phenomenal. But my kids, what they really struggle with on poetry recitation day is sitting and listening to the other kids while they recite their poem. And so we talk about that. We're like, you know this poem so well, but what do you need to do today while your friends are saying their poem? And then we talk about that. And again, it's not negative, but it's focusing on the parts that they really soar in. And then it's focusing on the things that they need help with. And if you yourself have ADHD or you struggle with executive functioning, you are so equipped to have this conversation. If you don't, you can always offer a ton of empathy, and that is wonderful in and of itself. But we hear so many times from ADHD parents that are like, I can't do it. And we just really want to reiterate, you absolutely can. And
Yeah.
another really big part about growth mindset is just keeping in mind that we always want to praise our kids' effort. You worked so hard on that, because the truth is the outcome isn't always what we wanted. My kids just auditioned for a musical. One of them got a call back and one of them did not. And if I only focused on which one got the positive outcome, then that would feel really bad. But what I want to focus on is you both worked so hard. You learned the dance, you learned the song, you stayed up late to figure this out. I'm so proud of how hard you worked on that. And that's really different from saying, oh, you did good because you got into the play and you did not. because you did not get a part. And as we put it in those terms, you're like, of course. I would never say that. So we want to
Mhm.
focus on the effort that they put in. It's so important.
Yeah, and I love the idea of it being a challenge and talking about it. Like, these things are a challenge for you, and we all have things in life that are going to be a challenge. We don't want to erase that for our kids. And I know many of us, it's hard to see our kids struggling,
Oh, so
but
hard.
when they have challenges early on, they're learning really important skills. And like you said with running, like, you're not a natural runner.
No.
Like, running is hard. It doesn't mean that you can't run, though.
Mhm.
It means that you need maybe a lot more training than somebody else who's naturally inclined to do it. And maybe you need to do extra weightlifting at
Yep.
the gym or those types of things. And you're talking with your kids about it. It's not that you cannot do these things, but
Mhm.
we're here to support you so that you can. And it might be more of a challenge than other things that are easy for you, but that's okay. And we all have things that are more challenging for us.
Absolutely. And I think another thing that can really help with these conversations is using analogies. And I love the example that doctors Rady and Holloway use in ADHD 2.0. They describe how your brain is like a Ferrari engine, but it has bright bicycle brakes. So it's like so powerful. It can go to zero to 60 in seconds flat, but it has these little bicycle brakes and it's hard to slow it down sometimes. And that means you have like all of these really, really great ideas and I love to hear about them. But when it's time to like slow your brain down and focus on this, that's harder for you. So you're really great at this, but then this is harder. So using these analogies, and I think this is also a really great opportunity to get your child's thoughts and hear them describe it. You know, back when I was still in private practice, just interviewing kids and asking about what's hard, what's easy, and just hearing their explanation of what's going on for themselves in their brain is so insightful. So I've heard kids kind of describe it as like, my brain just feels on fire sometimes.
Mm.
I've had a kid say, like, it feels like I'm driving full speed down the highway and there's all these signs that I know I'm supposed to read, but I'm going too fast to be able to read them. So just getting your child's insight and having them describe it too is so helpful.
Mhm.
And again, kind of bringing it back to like our kids really do have a lot of strengths, and there are a lot of strengths that come with ADHD, but our kids need to learn how to kind of harness those and use those to their benefit. And thinking of like characters or people that really, I'm thinking of Elsa, right? She has this amazing power, but she needs to learn how to use it for good. Think about what really interests your child. So my boys are really into Pokemon, for example. So like thinking about a Pokemon that really has like the characteristics that they have and how does their Pokemon use that to their advantage and for good. Um, Try to, tie it into something that your child's interested in, but think about these analogies and ways that we can kind of explain to them how their brain is working and why it's working the way it is will help them understand better just their brain.
Yeah. So I know with the families that I work with, when we get done with an evaluation and I'm giving them that diagnosis of ADHD for the first time, many times they are expressing to me feeling nervous about having this conversation because they don't really understand ADHD at that point. That's like the first time that they're hearing it. And if you're one of those parents and you're listening right now, just know we created our online course, Creating Calm, to give you kind of start to finish, like how to understand ADHD, how to understand your child's brain, their developmental level, how to understand what executive functioning is and how it impacts them. And I think it's a good place to start even before you have that conversation of, what is my understanding of ADHD and do I need to educate myself a little bit better so I can go into this conversation more confident. But I also want to encourage you that you don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to know everything about ADHD to have these conversations. And you can even talk with your child about that you're still learning and that you want to learn together along with them. And I think that's an important thing to talk with them about. The other thing to keep in mind is sometimes these conversations don't go well. And I can tell you from experience. Again, I have talked with teens and I've talked with younger kids, and sometimes I would say the majority of the time there is a wave of relief in those conversations in the kids that I talk to, where they feel like, oh my goodness, there's a name to this, and other kids have this, and they feel like they feel relief in that conversation. And there are cases, and I will tell you this is more rare, where kids are going to maybe become defensive or they get upset. And that has definitely happened. And I want to tell you it's okay. And maybe the conversation does go that way. And that's okay. The most important takeaway for today is that if it does go south, or even if you're just kind of first introducing this topic, the most important thing you can communicate to your child in that moment is, I love you. I love you just as you are, with your strengths, with your challenges. I love every piece of you. Okay. And they need to hear that, and you need to emphasize that. And you're consistently reminding them that you are there to listen. You're there to support them in whatever it is that they need. So just keep those things in mind, and remember, we are here to support you in any way.
Thanks for listening to Shining with ADHD by your hosts, Lori, Katie, and Mallory of the Childhood Collective.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like this video and hit subscribe so you can be the first to know when a new episode airs.
If you are looking for links and resources mentioned in this episode, you can always find those in the show notes. See you next time.